My name is Ash Dowling. I'm the Deputy Manager of Student Development with the Engagement and Success team here at the ANU. We'd like to welcome everyone to the second day of ACUR at ANU Undergraduate Research Conference. It's been a very exciting, stimulating and busy couple of days so far. We've got some really esteemed guests here today. They're a major sponsor for this year's conference, the Australian Bureau of Statistics. They're going to be sharing some insight and knowledge this afternoon on, I suppose, the breadth and scope of the work that they do. We just want to thank them as well as the conference organisers for their, I suppose, support of undergraduate research and their interest in this space. And welcome everyone today. So before we kick off today's session, I'd just like to start off by paying my respects to the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people of the Canberra region and extend that to all First Nation Australians whose traditional lands we meet, and extend that to elders past and emerging, and acknowledge that we are amongst the oldest continuing cultures in human history. So I'd like to, as I mentioned before, just welcome the team from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and I'll hand you over to Jacky, who will take the lead for the next part of the presentation. I hope everyone enjoys today's session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So my name is Jacky Jones. I'm the General Manager of Macroeconomic Statistics at the Australian Bureau of Statistics. I want to welcome you to this session. It's more than just statistics at the Australian Bureau of Statistics. So this session will just showcase some of the great work that we do at the ABS. And at the end of the session, we'll just finish with an overview. We've got an absolutely wonderful graduate program, and we'll just give you an overview of that as well. So I'm going to give you some context about what we do at the ABS, first of all, and then I'm just going to finish off with a bit of an overview about my career journey. So at the ABS, we produce a wide range of statistics, and they can basically be grouped under a number of themes. So population, society, the economy, the environment. And we run surveys, we have the 5-yearly census, and we use lots and lots of alternative data sets as well to produce a lot of our statistics. What we produce in the Australian Bureau of Statistics is regarded as official statistics, so they're expected to adhere to certain quality standards, and obviously they're absolutely fundamental for decision making by government in developing and monitoring policies, and also everyday Australian businesses and households in actually making their decisions. So to produce these, we use thousands and thousands of different data sources. And we have to have methods to actually transform those sources into statistics and into information insights. And as the world around us evolves, we have to be very responsive to that. And COVID was a very good example of that, where people wanted to have near real-time information. And we had to pivot very, very quickly to try and get more timely data sources, and then very, very quickly develop new ways of actually using that data, understanding that data, and producing really valuable insights that government really appreciated and used very heavily in terms of trying to decide what kind of policy responses they were going to have to COVID. So working at the ABS is really, really exciting. There are numerous different topic areas that you can work in. There are so many different skills that you can learn about, and you work with some really, really great people. And we're always looking to be innovative, and we've got some really exciting projects going on at the moment. So for example, developing some new monthly indicators about business turnover and household spending. We're also having to source more and more new data sources to think about what near real-time information we can actually be producing. So before I hand over to the presenters who are just going to tell you about some of the really interesting work that we're doing across the ABS, I just wanted to give you a quick overview of my career journey. So I joined the UK Office for National Statistics. So nearly every country in the world will have what's called a national statistical organisation. And so the UK Office for National Statistics is that organisation in the UK. And I joined as a junior researcher. Initially, I was working on the census. Then a couple of years later, I moved to work in methodology. And then years later, I moved to work in economic statistics. The experience that I've had through my career is absolutely incredible. The people I've worked with, the exciting projects that I've been involved in, not just within the ABS and within the UK Office for National Statistics, but also in international projects as well. Because when you work in a national statistical organisation, you're also part of a big kind of global international statistical system as well. So you get to work with people like the United Nations, people like the International Monetary Fund, and really kind of have huge opportunities to do some fantastic work. And then also, because there is a national statistical organisation in every country, you have the opportunity to go on secondments to different countries as well. So I actually came to the ABS from the UK 5 years ago, came originally to head up the labour statistics area, and then later on was promoted to the general manager of macroeconomic statistics. So I just wanted to kind of set that as a context in terms of there's some really exciting things that you can do in association with official statistics, learning about new data sources, developing new methods, thinking about how we actually produce things and actually disseminate them to the outside world as well. And I'm hoping today the presenters that we have will just give you kind of just a little taster about some of the exciting things that we do. So we have 3 presenters who will be just saying about work that they do that they've been involved in. And then at the end, Heidi will finish off giving you an overview of the grad programme. So I'm going to hand over to Deepa now, who's going to give you an overview of MADIP and BLADE, and I'm sure she will tell you what those actually stand for. So Deepa, I will hand over to you.
Thanks, Jackie. And Emma, if you can get the slides up, that'd be great. While we're waiting, if we can move to the next slide, perfect. So I'll give you a little intro about me. My name is Deepa Wright. I'm the Director of Data Services in the Data Strategy Integration and Services Division at the ABS. And one of the things that I'm responsible for is helping researchers access our key integrated assets, MADIP and BLADE. So MADIP stands for the Multi-Agency Data Integration Project, and that's our person-centered asset. And BLADE is our Business Longitudinal Analysis Data Environment, which is our business-centered asset. So today I'm going to tell you a bit about MADIP and BLADE and give you a bit of a taste on what some of the things you could be working on at the ABS, which are more than just statistics. So stepping into MADIP first, thanks Emma, I'll give you an overview of the asset. So as I mentioned, it's our person-based asset that was initiated back in 2015 to enhance the evidence base for policy and research. And really, it was a group of agencies who got together and said, we've got all this administrative data, surely we can make better use of it for policy analysis and research. So on the slide, you can see our key partners who've been involved from the beginning. And in terms of how it can be used, it's longitudinal data about individuals, but it cannot be used to identify anybody, and it cannot be used for compliance or monitoring purposes. And it brings together some nationally significant data sets. So if we move to the next slide, thanks. MADP combines information on healthcare, education, government payments, personal income tax, and population, including the census. And the asset has grown to over 22 nationally significant data sets over its 6-year history, with those data being updated on an annual or sub-annual basis. Over its history, the asset has expanded to focus on supporting key policy and research needs and has been driven by analytical hubs, both in the Commonwealth and state and territory, as well as in academia. And as Jacky mentioned, during COVID-19, we had to work really hard with our partners to be able to update that key data so that we were able to support near real-time analysis, particularly around changes to our labour market, impact of mental health during COVID. Next. So the research questions that MADP can answer and is answering are up on the slide, and it's quite a rich data source, so it can look at a range of different topics. So one of the projects we've got happening at the minute for Department of Health is supporting the COVID vaccine rollout. Another one is around the resilience of people and businesses during natural disasters. Looking at our labour markets and the skills gap in our economy, particularly looking at the vet sector, and also looking at COVID, uptake of government programs like JobKeeper and JobSeeker, and the mental health impacts on individuals and the community in COVID-19. Drilling down to one of those projects that is active right now, the COVID-19 vaccines project, that's bringing unit record information available in MADP together with the Australian Immunisation Register to support a positive vaccine rollout and look at different socioeconomic cohorts in the administration of that vaccine rollout and various interventions to help that be a successful program. So that's a key project that we're supporting at the moment. Next slide, if we move on to the current data available in MADP, this slide just shows you the wealth of information that we have. The green boxes highlight the population-based data from the census, as well as deaths and migration. The blue looks at our tax data that we've got from the ATO, as well as some business data that we can bring in together with MADP. We've got a whole bunch of education data sets in that red colour, and then we've got a wealth of health information that we've brought in the orange, noting that both our Medicare and our pharmaceutical benefits data comes in quarterly, and then in the purple we've got our social security payments, welfare payments from DSS. So the data is massive, and if we move to the next slide, there's infrastructure underpinning the asset, which is a person linkage spine, which is made up of 3 data sets that together build up a picture of every single person who's resident in Australia at any point between 2006 and 2020. And this spine here is updated every year, and it enables for a really smooth linkage process that can happen a lot more streamlined and timely fashion. Next slide talks about one of the products we've got available, which is the MADP Modular Product. Essentially, this is known as a standard product that's available now for researchers, and our teams build these. So essentially, it's a cut down version of the asset based around a set of core demographics and location information with a subset of those data sets that you can see for the various reference periods on the slide. The benefit is it's a taster to get into MADP before you move to looking at more detailed information. If we move to slide 9, we can provide customised extracts for access in our ABS secure data lab environment. And if you need additional information for your project, we actually do new integration all the time to MATTP to make that information available for research projects. So that's a bit about MATTP. Now we'll switch into Blade, which is our business integrated asset. And really that's a tool that combines that tax, trade, IP data to provide a better understanding of the economy and business performance over time. As with MATTP, you can't use the data to identify individual businesses, and it's to be used for statistical and research purposes. And if we flick forward again to the analytical content, it contains now 19 data sets that are updated annually, with some data sets updated quarterly, really to look at how we can better understand our businesses and the economy and factors that are driving performance, innovation, job creation, competitiveness and productivity, and provide those new insights. Moving to the next slide, what questions can Blade answer? Well, it's being used right now to look at the impact of COVID-19 on the labour market, looking at businesses who are taking up JobKeeper compared with those who don't, impacts to trade during COVID-19, and a range of other topics as well. Drilling down on the next slide to one of our research projects, this is the real-time analysis of the economy and labour market that's been undertaken by the Commonwealth Treasury, as well as state and territory treasuries are jumping in and looking at this information. So this is combining Blade, business level information, with some more high frequency data that's been rolled out through policies like JobKeeper, JobSeeker, JobMaker, early access to super, and seeing the impacts of COVID on employment and unemployment, helping to tune policy programs around employment and training, and looking at our labour market transitions during this shock. Moving to the next slide, the assets hung together in 3 sets of modules. The Blade Core, that has all of our core business demographic information from the business register, business activity statement, business income tax, pay as you go. We're adding in some insolvency data, some agricultural data, some IP data, and we've got some experimental business location information. In the standard module, it's a whole bunch of ABS business surveys that we link into the Blade, along with more detailed IP data from IP Australia. And then we've got trade modules on imports and exports from Department of Home Affairs. And as you can see, the data can be accessed on the next slide, again in the ABS secure environment. And again, we can do linkage to enable that. I mentioned before that we have now, moving on to the next slide, integrated person and business data through MATTP and Blade. And at the minute, only a part of the Blade can be made available, that Blade Core, together with all of MATTP. But by the end of the year, when our governance is in place, we'll be able to make use of all of MATTP together with all of Blade, providing a really powerful tool for analysis. The next slide just outlines the process that we make that data available under the 5 Safes framework in our data lab environment. And really that's an important part of our process to make sure that we're managing the confidentiality and the privacy of that data while we're maximising utility for approved projects. And that final slide that I'll talk to is around a new service offering. So making use of these assets requires a lot of capability, and we've rolled out a new service to provide customised aggregate data, so people who don't have the time, resources or capability to do that, we can work with them to deliver that for the customer Next slide. Thanks, Emma. So that's all I wanted to share with you. But I guess I've been in the same position that you are all in, finishing up or being at university and thinking, what am I going to do next? A career in the ABS is a really exciting one, and I'd encourage you to check it out. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Deepa. That was really great. And there are lots of people kind of asking questions, so I'm trying to respond to people as they're asking the questions online. So keep on asking questions. I'm going to move on now to Rish, who's going to tell us about some of the great work he's been doing on household expenditure data.
Thank you, Jackie. So hey everyone, my name is Rish and I've been working with the ABS within the Macroeconomic Statistics Division, or MSD, since February 2020. I started in the ABS as part of the Graduate Development Program, and the whole experience was really valuable for me in basically helping me better understand not only how to use statistics to answer the questions that we have, but also what the right questions to ask are. On top of that, the program has also really helped me better develop myself as a professional, has been influential in helping me understand what my career goals are. And in terms of the work I've done so far, I've had the fortune of helping understand how we can use big data to achieve our goals in areas like CPI, national account, retail trade, and even as part of the ABS's COVID response. Recently though, I moved over to the household expenditure data team to look at how we can use big data in place of the household expenditure survey, which is what I'm here to talk to you about today. So next slide, please. Awesome. So the Household Expenditure Survey, or HES, is a survey that's run by the ABS once every 6 years to help us understand trends within the Australian community relating to characteristics such as income, wealth, housing, expenditure. So for the sample of respondents who we approach, we try to maximize the coverage we have of every demographic group across the country, and ultimately try to get information about all the different types of households across the country. So, you know, for example, we might look at what's happening with pensioners versus non-pensioners, what's happening with single parents versus couple parents, households with groups of mates living together versus households with people living alone. And all the households who wish to participate are then required to fill out a questionnaire so that we get an idea of their demographic details. And then they need to record all of their expenditure for a set period of time, usually about a week, in a paper diary, which we send to them. Once they finish up with their diary, we then get that back from them, and it's processed into data sets that are then analyzed to produce those results. Next slide, please. Awesome. So now that you know about how the HES is actually run, or how it was run, you might now be thinking, well, what's the point of all this in the first place? Well, in a nutshell, the HES provides estimates of expenditure patterns and composition across the population, which gives people like economists, policymakers, academics, and other researchers a rich context to help understand the living standards and economic well-being of Australians. In terms of the specific uses, on the slide there, you can also see what some of those are. As you can see, one of the uses is also for official statistics production. So basically the results from the HES are used as inputs for some of the statistics that we produce. An example of this would be the selected living cost indexes, which basically measures how different population groups are experiencing the effects of inflation. As you can imagine, given the current circumstances of our time period and the rapid changes that we're seeing to all aspects of community, society, and the economy, the kind of information that the HES provides would be truly valuable to help us navigate the challenges that we're facing. Next slide, please. So I've talked about why the HES is so important and everything that the HES is good for, but what are the issues with the process and why are we looking to new opportunities and solutions? Well, the first should be pretty obvious. 6 years is a fairly big gap in time between the runs of HES, and as we've all seen, a lot can just change in even just 6 months. We want a solution which is more timely and more responsive to changing circumstances so that when situations arise, we'll be ready with answers. Another issue is that there is currently no alternative to the HES and what results we get from the HES. Sure, we can get bits and pieces of information from other sources, but nothing is as complete, has as much coverage, and is as high in quality as what the HES provides. That being said, however, we also understand that there probably could be a better way to run the HES itself. We know that the diary that's being currently used can be quite burdensome. I know I wouldn't be too thrilled myself about having to record expenditure in a paper diary, but even beyond that, there is actually a potential for optimizing the steps in which by which the process is run. Next slide, please. So what are we looking to do about all these issues? Well, throughout this past year, a new team has been working within the ABS to answer some of the questions about the HES. Since the HES is all about the Australian community, we thought it would be a good first step to take, we thought it would be good to take a human-centered design approach. And thus our first step was actually to reach out with the different users of the HES within the community and try to understand what value they actually get out of the results. We also asked them for their opinions and what improvements they would like to see with the way that the HES results are produced. Following this, we're also now looking into new, smarter survey designs that could make the process smoother while retaining or even improving the level of quality that we've had in the past. And we're also looking at ways in which we can leverage the advancements that we've seen in the data landscape these past few years to solve some of the problems that we're facing. Next slide, please. So at the ABS, we've been using big data for a while now. We found uses for it in spaces such as CPI, national accounts, retail trade, health, and we're even continuing to find more and more areas which we can use big data in. In terms of why we'd actually want big data, well, there are many advantages to it. And honestly, I could go on about it all day long, but some of the main ones here that I'll talk about are that big data sources are incredibly detailed and there's just a lot of it. There's also a high degree of reliability in getting the data because, you know, humans might not be able to respond to surveys for whatever reasons, but if you set up an automated process on a computer to get data, it's probably not going to fail unless something absolutely catastrophic happens. And yes, at the ABS, we also have a lot of questions that we want to answer about all different aspects of community and the economy. And luckily for us, it seems like data just keeps cropping up in all those areas. Next slide, please. So these days, basically every company and organization is talking about big data and how they're using big data to solve whatever problems. And it has become quite a buzzword or buzz phrase. But can big data actually help us solve all the problems that we're facing with HES? Well, the short answer is that we don't actually really know yet, and we won't know unless we actually try. With the HES, or any survey for that matter, the design of that survey is a very integral part of it, and usually it can be designed to fit exactly what we want to answer. But that's not always the case with big data. With big data, there's usually a lot of information, and oftentimes the data doesn't just give you the answer, but you actually have to work to figure out how you can use it to give you those answers, or whether it can even give you those answers in the first place. Another thing to note is that at the end of the day, what matters the most is the users and how they're actually going to be able to use the results. From speaking to them, we also learned that users are keen to see improvements, but they are hesitant about change. So we really have to be careful in making sure that whatever approaches that we are taking with big data are actually ones that are providing value to the users. Next slide, please. So what are we actually looking to do with big data for the HES? Well, so far we've reached out to data providers to establish a relationship. With these providers, we really try to get them on the same page to understand what the value of the HES is and how they'll be helping us and the community with their data. The next thing is actually working with the data and exploring it to see if it can actually be used to do what the HES does. Data science is a science, and thus the scientific method applies here. We want to test different hypotheses, experiment with different methods, and ultimately not be afraid to say no if something just isn't working the way we want it to. Remember, the HES is all about looking at different population groups and understanding the community and the expenditure trends that the different groups within the community are having. And if big data can provide us some, but not all the answers, we have to be forthright about it. That brings us to the last step. Once we understand what can or can't be done with the data, we'll then be making recommendations on how we can best use the data to minimize the challenges and issues that we're facing. As we venture into the coming years, I know that the use and sources of data will only keep growing. We might build a solution using big data now, but who knows, maybe in 5 years, some new type of data could come along and basically make the innovative work we're doing now look like old news. Seriously, there's truly never been a more exciting time to work with data. Alrighty, well, that's pretty much all I had for today. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to us. It's been a pleasure to present on my end. If anyone had any questions, comments, or feedbacks, please send them through. And if anyone had any other questions, you can feel free to contact me on my email there. And you can also read through our most recent paper, which talks about the work that we're doing to review the HES. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rish. And yeah, use either email Rish afterwards or use the question and answer function as part of the Zoom. So we're going to move on now to Harry, who's going to tell us about some of the freight analysis he's been doing.
Thanks, Jackie. So I'm going to be speaking about some of the innovative work the ABS is doing in supply chains, specifically two projects, one on real-time shipping freight analysis and the other on economic networks. I should mention this work is experimental at this stage, but very promising and quite exciting, especially in terms of the new data frontiers we're approaching with this kind of work. Next slide, please. Yep, so as a bit of background, as you've already heard, we're seeing massive increases in the quantity and quality of data, as well as the computing power available to make use of all this new information. So in practical terms, by being able to harness this new information, we can start to rethink what a national statistical office can do and how governments can respond to complex policy problems. So where traditionally we may have only had access to a fraction of the population, with big data, we have access to most, if not all of it. And here I'm referring to population in terms of businesses or cargo ships, not just people. And when we talk about linked data here, or increased quality of data, I'm referring to more of a network of connections rather than any isolated linear features. And with computing power, we're now able to handle up to terabytes of data, so it truly is big data. Next slide, please. So, a bit of context to supply chain disruption. It's a very topical issue at the moment with quite disparate and complex policy issues. Supply chains themselves are complex, as businesses and consumers are all dependent on a variety of different actors and policies, and of course on each other. And as you can see, it is a multidisciplinary problem with implications across all of government. And on the next slide, one of the solutions we're looking into is AIS data. So all commercial vessels, but in our case, we're mainly focused on cargo ships, have a collision avoidance system, an AIS transceiver, to avoid collisions. So they report the position every 7 to 12 seconds, which, as you can imagine, with the number of ships on the ocean, that's quite a big data set, and very high frequency. And on the next slide, thank you. So one of the major benefits is it's in real time, which opens up huge analytical opportunities, but also challenges the way we think about decision making and the policy process. The other interesting part of the AIS data is ships will report not only their current location and speed and navigational status, if they're anchored or if they're docked, but also where they're headed, their intended destination. So we can create really accurate forecasts on ship movements and trade. So on the next slide, just to give an example, anecdotal evidence. This is a picture my family took in WA because they know I'm working on ships. And from that, on the next slide, you'll see I could find the exact port and all the neighboring ships. And on the next slide, you'll see and start to unpack all that information, turn it into proper data, and start finding out answers to questions about how many ships are there, how long do they stay there, how congested is that port. And so we can really start to address real policy problems. On the next slide, thank you. So when we have all this data and we have congestion indicators and other things, we can start to link this also to import and export records, and then to businesses, and find out answers to, what's the impact of a tropical cyclone on port congestion, on businesses, on supply shortages. Where should we be allocating funding for infrastructure projects on not only the port itself, but the surrounding infrastructure? So obviously we're working hand in hand with BITRA and Department of Infrastructure and a whole host of other agencies that are working on supply chains. And as a global data set, we can see not only the impacts on our own domestic ports, but the impact of trade sanctions and tariffs. And hopefully we can use that information to support exporters. And on the next slide, thank you. Supply chain disruption is a global problem, and so we're working hand in hand with the United Nations and partner countries to form solutions. This is just an example of some of the agencies we're working with through the UN. And I think it really shows the wide-ranging interest in this problem, but also the opportunities to collaborate and work jointly on these problems. And next slide, please. So moving away from imports and exports, we're also looking into domestic supply chains. So this is where we start looking into not only big data, but network data, where everything's linked. So in this case, we're thinking of all the businesses as linked to each other through supply chains. So my team and I are working on innovative solutions with the Dutch Statistics Office to reconstruct domestic supply chains. The end result is a network of all the businesses in Australia, and the connections between them are the goods and services they trade to each other in dollar value. Once again, this really shifts the way we think about data, not simply as distinct units or sectors, but part of this larger system. Next slide, thank you. So I won't go into too much detail on the method, but the basic idea is to think of it as a constrained optimization problem where we know some information about the firms and their products, and we have empirical evidence about their behavior, so we can effectively model the entire business supply chain network. So we have text records about purchases and sales, we have survey data about products and which industries use which products and which industries make which products. So we know, supermarkets don't buy, supermarkets buy apples from farmers, but they don't buy iron ore from mining companies, just to give you a simple example. We also know that larger firms will have more trading partners, they'll have a bigger share of the market, they're more likely to trade with one another. So, the biggest wheat farm is going to have to go to the biggest flour mill in order to turn all of that wheat into flour. And of course, with transport costs means that it's cheaper to trade with someone closer to you than someone further away. And what you end up with at the end of that is the great big weighted directed network. So we have an idea of the flows of products and which direction they're going between businesses. Next slide, please. As you might imagine, this is definitely a new data frontier for us, where instead of looking at supply chains in isolation, we can consider the economy-wide ramifications at that business level. So introducing, added industries into this creates new layers of complexity, but more importantly, it has a much better representation of what the economy looks like and how the economy actually functions. And of course, combining these two projects, we can really start to address supply chain disruption. Next slide, thank you. So throughout all this work, we can start to understand financial contagion, supply shortages, and how they ripple out throughout the economy. How inflation moves from one business to another. We can quantify the risk of these events and ideally model different policy approaches to then mitigate these risks or dilute the effects. And that's about it from me. That gives you kind of an overview of the innovative work we're doing in addressing significant policy issues. Thanks.
Fantastic, thanks Harry. So last up, we're going to move to Heidi, who's going to tell you a bit about the ABS grad program. And Rish, there's a question in the Q&A asking you about your experience of being a grad. So maybe at the end of Heidi's presentation, you might want to just say a few words, if that's okay, Rish. I'll hand over to Heidi first.
Thanks, Jackie. Yeah, that sounds great. And thanks everyone for your questions in the Q&A. I can see there's a lot of interest there in about what I'm going to be talking about. So I hope I can cover off on all your questions through my presentation. But if not, I'll come back to the Q&A and just make sure we've addressed everybody's questions so far. So yes, I'm Heidi Young and I'm one of the Graduate Development Program Coordinators here at the ABS. And I've been doing this for about 3 years, but the program itself at the ABS is over 60 years old. So it's a very successful grad program, and we've got a lot of really successful graduates that have gone through to really senior levels in the ABS and the APS. I wish I could say it's all because of the grad program, but it's more because the ABS itself is a fantastic place to work, and we get a lot of support from the agency in the program with supporting our graduates that come through, with giving them really exciting work and a lot of support in their leadership development. So I'll talk a little bit more about the program and a little bit about what sort of roles we've got and that sort of thing as well. So just to start off with some numbers, next slide please. Emma, as we do, just to give you an idea, our graduate cohort this year, we've just got about just over 40 graduates, and we're spread across Australia, which is fantastic. It's a really unique opportunity to be able to offer people different roles across the countryside. In saying that, we do tend to have quite a lot of graduates relocate to Canberra for some roles. So that opportunity is available as well for a lot of people, and quite a lot of people that do commence working with us as what we in temporary roles before they start the grad program. So I know there's a question there about, can I start working before I start the grad program? And yes, sometimes those opportunities are available to you. Just to give you some idea for next year's grad cohort, it's going to be significantly larger, and we've got some larger numbers across in our Sydney and Melbourne areas too. So the 2022 graduate cohort, Emma, if you can go to the next slide, please, just gives you a bit of an idea of where our graduates are going to be placed, and we'll also be as I said, expecting over 100 next year. So it's quite a big jump in our numbers. Next slide, please. To give you an idea about the types of roles that we have, we've undertaken a bit of a different approach with our recruitment for 2022, and we'll continue to in our APS data professional stream recruitment, where we actually recruit for over 20 different agencies in the Australian Public Service. And it's a really great way to just do one application, have access to lots of different agencies. Of course, you'll want to pick the ABS because we're the best, but it's just a way to exposure to other different parts of the Australian Public Service, because we are part of that bigger network. So the types of roles that we recruit for are up on the slide there, and they've got varying degrees of the work that they undertake, on how much they analyse data, looking at new methodologies, looking at how we quality assure our data, and looking at how we tell all those really great stories about the statistics that we collect, because that's obviously really important, where it adds all that value to the work we do. And we also obviously recruit for ICT graduates and HR as well. And again, that can be across various locations, and all of that information you can find on our website. Next slide, please. The purpose of the program, and I'm glad that Rish gave this a plug before, but it is not only to develop sort of your data capability, but your professional capabilities as well. And so we really try hard to bring in different elements into the graduate program, where you have opportunities to learn different sort of critical skills around communication and teamwork and leadership, and critical thinking, as well as the data capability skills that are a lot of on the job within your roles as well. But we have lots of other supports around online learning and things, which I'll talk about in a minute. And one of the key parts is to actually transition you and support you in your career in the ABS and in the APS more broadly. So we try to give you some more exposure to graduate data networks across the APS and things like that, so that it's not just about your role within the ABS, but the APS more broadly, to just extend those opportunities to you. Next slide, please. So some of the key elements that we cover off in the training in the grad program, we have things like workshops, which we do sort of live and online now in this new environment, where we can get people together. You can build your graduate networks across the whole of the ABS, which is a really great opportunity. We provide different seminars with guest speakers internally and externally to, again, just try and broaden your understanding of the work that we do at the ABS, because it is so broad, as you've heard today. You get an opportunity to do a graduate project, which is working on a real ABS issue that needs to be dealt with, and it's working with a lot of stakeholders within and outside the business as well. Our senior executive shadowing program is a really popular part of the program, and it's a good example of that support I was alluding to earlier, where our senior leaders are really engaged with sharing their knowledge and also learning a lot from our graduates too, about opportunities for the work within the ABS. So that's a really popular part of the program, and again reflects that good support that we've got at the senior levels. And rotations is something that we're really just commencing this year and into next year and future years, to give graduates an opportunity to experience different work programs, and again to build their networks as well, because that's really important. So there's lots of blended learning opportunities as part of the program, just to give you a bit of an idea of the sorts of things that you'd be doing as part of the program. But then there's also a lot of learning that you'll undertake just as part of your role, and a lot more technical associated with your actual job role. Next slide, please. Just some of the things I wanted to mention about what we offer just to support grads as well in the graduate program is coaching and mentoring, which are some great services to help you build yourself professionally as well as your on-the-job capabilities. Online learning, as I mentioned, and some self-development assessment tools that we use. So that's really significant to help you not only in the roles that you're undertaking now, but for the future. So there's some great opportunities for you for your own personal development. And on the next slide, which is my last slide, I just wanted to encourage you to follow the ABS on social media. I've got a fun post there about some of the great stuff that we put out through our social comms. But it's a really good way to just keep abreast of what's happening, and also when opportunities are coming out, advertising when grad program applications are open. You can also go to our careers page, which I'd strongly encourage you to do if you want more information about the roles that are available, both on our temporary register, but also when the graduate program goes out for applications, which is usually about March every year. And there's a lot of information on the website there about all the different streams and what skills are involved. Someone did ask a question about what skills are we looking for, and what sort of degrees are we looking for? Well, the work, as my colleagues have mentioned, is really quite broad. So we love everyone at the ABS. We're happy to have lots of variety and diversity in the skills and backgrounds and knowledge that you have. Certainly things obviously to do with data analytics and statistics and mathematics are really encouraged. But certainly we cover lots of things with economic statistics, social statistics, and engineering, psychology. We've got people from all different sorts of backgrounds. So we really want people that are passionate about data and the work that we do here. So that's something that is critical to have. And obviously when you're doing your application, there's some testing that they do through your application process, and looking at communication skills and basic things like that. Also on that careers page, you can actually email the recruitment team. So they have people specifically in recruitment who look after the graduate program, and they can certainly respond to more specific queries if anybody has one. I'll just quickly pause there and have a look at the Q&A that have come through. And if anyone else wants to ask a question now, I'll just check if I've covered off on some of those questions. Oh yes, someone's asked a question about census. Obviously in our census years, we definitely have graduates that are working directly on census, but because census is such a big project, we do have people involved in working on it, both in the years leading up to and post a census year. And so those opportunities do exist, but specifically in that census year, definitely. We also give graduates who aren't particularly employed in a census role an opportunity to have a census immersion. So they're sort of involved in the census for just a short time. So they do get to experience that. And yes, it is very interesting and exciting work. The training opportunities, hopefully I've covered off on that question. There was one about research. Now, as part, are there opportunities for research in the graduate roles? Not as part of the graduate program specifically, but certainly within the ABS, there probably are some areas where that might be an opportunity, particularly maybe in our methodology areas or something like that. I don't know if any of the other panelists have got some experience with that, but not specifically as part of the graduate program. There was also a question about, oh yeah, what university degrees? I think we've covered off on that one. Can you work from home as an ABS graduate post-pandemic? Yes, you can. We certainly encourage graduates to be working in a supported environment with their supervisors and their teams initially when they start. So we do have some parameters around when you can start working from home. But yes, at the moment in this day and age, we're really just going with whatever the current restrictions are and what's possible. So we're certainly working on the best we can to make sure people are supported when they come in and given the opportunities that they can to work with their teams in the office if possible, or also working from home. So that wasn't a weird question at all. That was a good one. Okay. I think that's the majority of questions related specifically to learning and the graduate program. I might just throw to Rish now to get him to respond to the question that's come directly to him.
Yep. Yeah, thanks, Heidi. So my experience being recruited as a grad. So yeah, as Heidi alluded to, one of the big priorities that staff generally have when it comes to new employees and anyone that you're working with is basically development is a very top priority. So right from the get-go, something that I felt like I was always heard on was that, you know, I wanted to try doing things this way. I wanted to develop these particular skills for myself. I wanted to go and learn this thing because I thought it was going to be extremely valuable in helping me improve the way in which I work. And pretty much every step along the way, the management staff was incredibly supportive. They'd always make sure that you felt heard. The environment in general is just incredibly inclusive. So, you know, right from the get-go, even just starting as a grad like myself, like I always felt that, you know, whenever I did want to share my opinion, I was free to be able to share that opinion. And also that opinion was respectfully considered as well. It wasn't just like, you know, oh, you're a grad, so we're not going to, you know, take it too seriously. That's not the case. They will, like, if you have something important to say, they will take that into consideration. And yeah, best advice to an aspiring ABS graduate employee. So I'd say the best advice, well, for me personally, this might not just be applicable to grad employee, just any kind of employee. I think don't be afraid to try. You know, innovation comes off the back of many failures. So don't be afraid to fail, because that through that you will be able to learn and find future success as well. In terms of ABS specific advice, one thing that I would highly suggest and recommend is trying to understand the value that the ABS plays in the wider community. So, you know, understanding how the statistics that we use are interpreted by different organizations, different groups of people like policymakers and whatnot. Sorry, and how that's used to then go ahead and make decisions, and how those decisions then serve the users of the community. So yeah, from getting a good understanding of that kind of changes the perspective that you look at all of the work that you do through. And also on top of that, like understanding the value that it generates within the society, the work that we do here, it also, me at least, it gives me a very deep sense of personal satisfaction in the work I do. So yeah.
Thanks, Rish. Great answer. I'll hand back to Jacky now. If Jacky, you want to, I know there's a question directly in there for yourself about your GM role, and there's a few other questions in there. I think there's one for Deepa too.
Thanks, Heidi. So yeah, there was one question about kind of, you know, how do you progress in an NSO, and my response to that was really about, don't be scared to try new things. And one of the most scary points of my career was when I was happily sitting in methodology, having a lovely time with, you know, statistical methodology and survey methodology, and I was asked to move to economic statistics, which I knew nothing about. I did not know there was 3 measures of GDP. I had never thought about it in my life. And it was one of the best things that I could do, because I'd actually forgotten how much I loved learning. So yeah, trying things where you think, I can't possibly do that, actually putting yourself out there and giving it a go is kind of a great way to actually progress in your career. So that's kind of my experience. I just wanted to add one thing in terms of, you know, we've very much focused today around the grad program and sort of all some examples of some really interesting projects that the guys here are working on. But there's also opportunities, you know, if you weren't successful as applying for the grad program, we're always looking, you know, advertising for people to either come in on an ongoing basis or as non-ongoings. And very often people will tell you their stories who've got quite senior in the organisation where they started off as a non-ongoing. Usually the story goes something along the lines of, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I applied to be a non-ongoing in the ABS, thought I'd just stay for 6 months, and kind of like 30 years later, I'm still there, and now I'm doing this job. So there's quite a lot of those experiences that you hear about, but it is a good way of another good way of actually getting in the door if you're interested in working for the ABS.